been trying to stay up with all of the changes in today's societies so I just don't get old and ignorant. And I reading this book, The Mail by Sherman J. Silver, MD. And I also have read this other book, The Holy Bible, inspired by the Creator God. It's a matter of faith. There's a lot in today's world about sexual identity and not offending people, because it's no longer just him and her. You need to be aware of where people are at in their own minds and in their own sexuality, so you're not being rude, so you have understanding. And there's part of me, because I work in engineering, it's like, well, we just got the laws of physics, we got the laws of biology, we have the laws of chemistry. We've just got all these laws that'll dictate how the world functions. On the other hand, human beings don't always obey the laws, and then you've got this diverse perspective on what people think, and you toss in what people are told to think and what society expects of them, and you get this rich mixture of what people are and what they think they are and what society tells them. And if I just go by the Bible, if I just go by what Jesus taught, he said in the beginning he made them male and he made them female. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And Jesus said, don't have sex outside of marriage. Well, that's pretty straightforward from Jesus' point of view. You're either male or female. You only have sex when you're married. I mean, that's not the world we live in. That's the teachings of the Christ. And then he explained, well, if you don't do what I say, well, then unhappy things happen to you. Or you will be unhappy, or you'll die prematurely. That's the Christ perspective. That's his words. And people can argue with him, pick up the book and argue with the Creator about what you were biologically made. But if you actually read the science, even the psychology book, they talk about people really are either genetically, every cell in your body is either XX or XY, or a combination, because there are single X's and there are double X's and a Y. But genetically speaking, even the psychologist talks about, this is what you are genetically. So the genetics, the cellular evidence says, yeah, Jesus was right. Genetically, you're either male or female. You're XX or XY. You take a biopsy, you can look at it, yep, yeah, well, that's what you are. You look at your DNA or your RNA and say, yep, well, that's where you've been, those who your parents are. I mean, that's just the genetic scientific fact. But, we know that the genetic scientific fact about you, what seems to be evident or self-evident truth, as the forefounders of our country talked about, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are ordained on earth to make sure that this happens, right? And then these same men turned around and they enslaved black people and kept women from voting and shot the natives off the land that they wanted. So how much have these people who've actually penned this information actually carried out what they said was the self-evident truth. Right? I mean, comedians make a joke out of it. And we do that as human beings. Well, this is the truth. And then you're like, well, what about this? And you're like, well, we live in our own realities until somebody slaps us upside the head and says, well, wait a minute. I don't think your reality is what you're saying fixes in with what you're actually doing. And Jesus warned us about that. Watch out, man. Because we all do that. We can be saying and espousing one thing and living another way and fool ourselves, right? And human beings, we train ourselves. And society trains us to a certain degree. And it's so easy to fool ourselves about stuff. What we are, who we are, what we really think, and stuff like that. I mean, that's humanly thinking. I mean, you can train people to do some pretty silly stuff. I mean, if you actually have physical contact with their brains and their bodies, you can actually make them do stupid stuff. I mean, train soldiers to run across a field when people are mowing them down with machine guns. I mean, that's not really preserving life, but you can be trained to do that. I mean, you can be trained to do a lot of different things that actually don't promote your life or other people's life. Soldiers were trained to stand aboard ship while the women and children got off. I mean, that used to be at one time. And then that's just training. So what does it mean when you take all these things that human beings can be trained to do, or fooled to do, or taught to do, or deceived to do, and then you ask them what their sexual identity or their orientation is? I mean, people will do all sorts of things to fit in. I mean, our hairstyles, the way we dress, how we live. Yeah, this is American culture. So I fit into the American culture, right? I live in a city, so I fit into the city culture. When I lived out in the country, well, then I could, grab a gun and go out my back door and go hunting and not think anything of it. You don't do that nowadays in Milwaukee. I live in downtown. I don't walk out outside the door with an uncased weapon and, walk a few miles away where there's the geese and just start banging away with my shotgun. You just don't hunt in downtown Milwaukee. It's socially unacceptable. And so there's all these social cues that go with it. So, how do you even know what you really are? Right? I mean, I read the Psychologist book, right? And they've got facts. There's documented scientific facts that before 18 months old, you can assign the identity to a child. And they've done it. Children that come with ambiguous genitalia and that, well, we'll just assign this and they'll live the rest of their life. And they do. They've proven it works. Little children don't know stuff, so you can train them to do all sorts of stuff. They don't know any difference. Unless somebody else comes along or some chance in nature, they get away from that environment and they behave differently. It's just a proven fact. Everybody knows that. You don't even have to talk about it. Train children to be a certain way. And unless they escape that environment and that training, they'll behave that way. Yeah, they know children that are, sometimes they don't know their right hand from their left hand. Or shapes and sizes and all that. They know that. In fact, the Bible says that. God said that to Jonah. There are 250,000 beings in this, people in this city that don't know their right hand from their left. It's just a nice way of saying there's so many children. So how do you know? What have you chosen? You're genetically one thing, but you think or feel or act in a different way. Are you really choosing it? Did somebody train you that way? Is somebody forcing it on you? Yeah, because in this same book they talk about how the male mind thinks about sex, and a little bit about how the female mind is as a comparison. But you can trick people's minds. And he talks about it in the book. How some men are forced and some men are tricked, and they do all sorts of things that they wouldn't normally do sexually. And then later, after they get out of prison or wherever the structured environment was at, they don't behave that way. But as long as they were in that environment, they behaved that way. So I was reading all this stuff on the web. And reading it in the book, reading it in the Bible. Is it really just a trick? Are you just trained? I mean, Sir Ken, I forget what his name is, Robinson or something, talks about training. Educating children on whatever their life's work is, math, science, cooking, whatever. And he talks about how children get forced into one occupation or another simply because society or parents say, well, this is what we want you to be. Or because the social norms, the social cues, whatever the psychologist wants to tell them, well, this is what we think. And kids live miserable lives. And that's just their work that they're doing. That's not their sexual identity, which we know gets assigned and pushed around too. So after looking into it all, it's like, well, you got to be really careful. Because it could be just societal pressures. I mean, it used to be, various parts of America, it was illegal to marry outside of your race. And it's still that way in some places. I mean, in Israel, a Jew cannot marry a non-Jew. And you see that in the Bible, too. Think about it. And then there's the things with race, there's the things with age, social status. How can you marry a commoner? And that's about marriage. And then you get into the different sexual identities and orientation, and you're like, unless you stick two people alone on a desert island 15 years, how do you freaking know? I mean, as an engineer, I'm thinking, well, how could I run a test to make this, so you know that you know, and it's just not all the societal influences and that stuff. Well, as an engineer, I could take, or as a farmer, you take these living beings and you put them there and you see how they behave, right? You isolate them, you insulate them, you do all these things. I mean, if I'm running a test, a program, or a piece of hardware, or a piece of software, whatever it is, I have set up a test. So I got to the point, well, apart from somebody telling you the only scientific test you could do was take two people and three people, two people, so it's just the two of them. Because we know it doesn't happen if there's just one. Takes two to tango is what the old saying was. So if put two people out on a deserted island for 10 or 15 years, you could see what happens. Personally, I wouldn't want to get stuck out there with another guy. That's boring. I've got brothers and sisters, you know, so I wouldn't want to be out there with my family members. I already got 50 years of knowing what that's been like, so. But that's really the only way to know for sure. That would be the only scientific test, right? Seeing parents and siblings, family members, extended family members, that is. And society does all these things to force you and to affect you. Good or bad, you know, when you think about it. Yeah, don't be deceived. How much of it is really what you know as scientific fact, or how much of it is you just accept it on faith, whether it's faith in men or faith in what Jesus said. How do you know? Unless you can run a scientific test. Other than that, you're just running on faith. And whatever society is telling you it should be. You know, they tell you diamonds are really valuable because they're rare and all this other stuff. And I remember as a child, they told me diamonds, it took millions of years to make them. And then I got into college and I picked up my thermodynamics book. After they taught me all the math. I looked up the formula at page 6 something. 691. Yeah, 621. 6th edition. Yeah, so after all that engineering, all that work, I look it up and the formula says time doesn't matter when it makes diamonds. Diamonds can be made instantaneously. Diamonds can take thousands or millions of years. Time doesn't matter. Well, they lied to me about diamonds. Or they told me about diamonds in the mental construct that they had. Because it takes time, and it doesn't take time. It takes pressure and temperature to make a diamond. So what makes your sexuality? Well, they know. Biologically, genetically, you're one thing. So, what kind of a diamond are you? You man-made diamond? Nature-made diamond? Were you made instantaneously? Or did it take thousands or millions of years? If you believe in that. See, nobody was around, so it's a belief. What are you really? Think about it. Not what you feel. Or is it what you feel? Is it what you think? Is it what everybody else told you to feel and think? It can be kind of scary, isn't it? That's why it's necessary to get off by yourself, off away from people. Have a good friend or two. Yeah, so they lied to me about diamonds. Now that I've gotten older, I can see a whole bunch of other lies and social cues and stuff like that they tell you just so you fit into the society the way they want you to fit in. And now they want to say, well, now the rules about sexual identity have so changed that, and the psychologists go along with a certain amount of this, and there's the social norms for this, and the social norms for that. It's actually just easier to stick with what Jesus said. I can support that with science. And the rest of it I know society forces on people. That makes it pretty straightforward for me. Jesus said, you're either male or female. And my biology, cellular, is you're either male or female. And society will push and shove and poke and twist and torture you. To see what you will be. And for me, that answers the questions. And when somebody has told me, well, you're this or well, you're that, it's like, well, no, actually Jesus said in the beginning he made the male or made the female. And science supports that. And then you've got all these choices and all these social pressures. That's the truth. I realize it's like diamonds and a lot of other stuff they've told me over the years. Diamonds aren't rare. They're only expensive because they've got a corner on the market. There's thousands of them, millions of them everywhere. They're common. They could be as common as pennies if they just flooded the market with what was there. It's not a rare jewel. I mean, it's a strong jewel. I mean, it's really, really hard and everything. But they're not rare. That's the truth about diamonds. And that's the basic truth about your sexuality, too. So, be careful. As Jesus said, don't be deceived. Just don't get fooled.